In this section of notes, we're going to look at some basics on how to conduct surveys and how to get the people in your sample for those surveys. So there's a lot of vocabulary here. So the first word is population, and that is like the entire group that you want to try to find out about. The census would be if you were try to collect data from all of those people, which we typically don't do for many reasons because it's pretty challenging to try to track down everybody. And then there's also a sample, which is more common, which is where you try to take some subset of the population and you want to collect information from them. So your population is the whole group, the sample is a subgroup, and we want to collect data from the sample so that we can apply the same findings of the sample to the population. One thing to add here, there's also another group in here called a sampling frame. A sampling frame is like a list of people that you're choosing your sample from. So for example, let's say you wanted to try to make some predictions about how people might vote in the next presidential election. Well, your population would be all of the registered voters in the country. Your sampling frame would be some sort of a list of those people. And then your sample would be the people that you picked from that list. Now, a lot of times the sampling frame is the same as the population. Sometimes you don't have a list of everyone. So sometimes your sampling frame is limited in that there are fewer people on the list than there are in the population. Now, two other vocabulary terms that are important here are the idea of a statistic and a parameter. Statistics and parameters are essentially similar things. They're summaries. So like maybe you find the mean or maybe you find a proportion. And then the statistic is just the mean of the sample or the proportion of the sample. And then the parameter is the mean or the proportion of the population. So if we're talking about the who you're going to vote for example again with an election, if we maybe said our statistic was we took a sample of 100 people and 60% of them said they were going to vote for the current president to be reelected. That 60% is a statistic. If I think that's also true for the population, then that 60% would be the parameter. So a statistic and a parameter are similar. It's just that the statistic describes a sample and the parameter describes an entire population. So next we'll take a look at how you go about taking a sample. So there's 3 steps here. The first thing you have to do is you have to define the population that you're interested in. And then you want to find out exactly what do you want to measure. So do you want to know what percent are going to vote for the current president to be reelected? Or you might ask, what is the average number of steps that high school students take per day, since everyone's measuring their steps with their pedometers and their smartwatches and phones. And then a sample survey is our method of data collection for this type of question, where we would just ask people what it is that they're going to do. So how are they going to vote? How many steps did they take on average over the last week? Something like that. And then last, you're going to describe how you're going to pick your people. So how are you going to do that? You've got maybe 1,000 people in the high school if you're going to try to estimate the average number of steps per day taken by a member of our school community. How are you going to pick, say, 50 of them? Now we'll start with some things that you don't want to do. So there are some bad ways to do a survey, and then there are some good ways to do a survey. One bad way to do a survey is to do a convenience sample. A convenience sample is just asking people who are easy to find. So maybe if you wanted to estimate the average number of steps that someone in our high school takes every day, and you just ask everyone in your first block class, that would be a convenience sample. And that results in biased responses. So it's not necessarily representative because maybe you're a senior and your first block is filled with seniors, and maybe seniors take more or less steps than, say, freshmen or than teachers. So you want to make sure that however you get your sample, the whole population is somehow represented. Otherwise, you get bias in your results, which means that the answer you get from your survey doesn't match the true answer. So maybe you asked all of your first block classes and they said, on average, we take 8,000 steps per day. But then if you were to really look at everyone, maybe that number could possibly be different, more or less than 8,000. That would be bias. Another bad way to do a survey is voluntary response. This is when participants choose whether or not they are going to be in the sample. A common example of this is a lot of times grocery stores or other stores sometimes will print off a receipt for you when you shop there. And then at the end of the receipt, it says, call in and take this survey. And you have the choice of whether or not you call in and do that. The reason that this is biased is because people who either had a really great experience that day at the store or a really bad experience, they're more likely to call in than someone that just had an average experience. So you end up getting, again, a biased result. So now we'll look at how to sample well. So what you want to do is you want to do something random. So you want to make sure that everyone has an equal chance of being selected. And if that's the case, then your sample is random. And that helps to reduce bias. There are lots of types of random samples, and then there are subtypes that are specific kinds of random sampling. So the first kind of subgroup, the first type of random sampling that we'll talk about is a simple random sample of size n. N is going to be a number, so maybe you'll say a sample of size 10, which means you're going to pick 10 people at random, or a sample of size 50. Those would be the lowercase n. However many people you're picking is your sample size. Now there is a separate video that I'll have you watch later on how to do a simple random sample on your graphing calculator. But for now, we're going to start with how to use the table of random digits. This is located at the end of your formula packet, and we'll look at how to do that first. So if you're using technology, that would be where you're using your calculator. Again, there's another video for that. Or you could do a website like random.org. They have ways to pick random numbers. And what you would do is you would take all the people in your population and you would label them from 1 to capital N. Capital N is the number of people in your population. And then you would use the calculator or use random.org or some other digital way to do it. And that's how you would pick your lowercase n, your sample size, number of people. Versus if we're going to use table D, which is our table of random digits, you still got to start by labeling everyone. And when we say use as few digits as possible, for example, if you are going to pick from a population of 20 people, then that's 2-digit numbers. So you have to have 1 would be 01, 2 would be 02. So you want to try to reduce things as much as you can. That way you're not skipping digits. So for example, if you were only picking a number within 2 digits, you wouldn't want to go to 3 digits because you'd have to skip more. You'll see what I mean here in a moment. Picking some way to do this at random, so you'll pick a random place in your table to start, and then you'll read straight across the table. You'll want to skip repeats if it doesn't make sense for your problem, and you'll want to skip over numbers that don't match up with a person in your sample. And then you'll keep doing that process until you have the number of people that you need. So again, that's a little weird just to see the description, but let's look at an example to make more sense of that. So here are a bunch of hotels. There are 28 of them, and I want to pick 4 of them. The line that you see in kind of the pinkish purplish box, that's like a line from your random number table. From line 130. So I picked a random place to start, and that's the line from my random digit table. So since I have 28 hotels, I'm going to be working with 2-digit numbers. So I'm taking this list of numbers and splitting them up into 2 digits at a time. Notice how the space after the 5th digit, so there's like a 5-1 and then there's a space and then there's a 6-4. That space doesn't really matter. You can see the 1 that was the 5th number and the 6 that was the 6th number come together and make a 16. So you take all of these values here and you make them into 2-digit numbers, because our list goes from 0, 1 to 2, 8. So I'm working with 2-digit numbers there. Next, I would start going across. So 69 is not a number on my list. My numbers only go up to 28. 5 is a number on my list, and it corresponds with the Beach Castle Hotel. So I'm going to pick that one as one of my 4. And then I'm going to keep doing this until I get a total of 4 hotels, skipping over numbers that don't make sense. And if I would happen to get a repeat, like here I get 17 again, so I'm going to skip over that repeat. And then I'd keep going until eventually I'd get one that's not a repeat, and I have my 4 total hotels. Now, in terms of your random number table, sometimes you might have to wrap around to the next row of your table. That is a possibility. So our random sample ends up being Beach Castle, Radisson, Ramada, and Sea Club. Don't forget to watch the video on how to do a simple random sample on your graphing calculator, and then try the practice problems before moving on to the next section of notes.